what Acorn does is they use Section 7 of Motor Voter, National Voter Registration Act, to get as many people registered onto the rolls as possible, even if they aren't real people. People have reported on a Acorn program to register non-existent voters because they pay a bounty. I mean, that's the thing to remember is Acorn was paying bounties to people going out and harvesting voter registrations. For each registration, you get paid. So, you know, if it's a phony one, no worries, you get paid. So that was part of the big problems with what Acorn was doing. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act applies to 16 states, including states in the old Confederacy, but also Michigan, New Hampshire, one borough of New York City and not the other, California, Alaska, South Dakota. So Section 5 preclearance obligations go well beyond the South. What this has meant is in the past that the Justice Department, particularly under Eric Holder, has used Section 5 to stop voter integrity initiatives. They did it in 2009 by objecting to the Georgia Citizenship Verification Program. Georgia passed a law that said if you want to vote, you have to show you're a citizen. Shocking. And the Holder Justice Department blocked that law and said that it was potentially discriminatory against Hispanics, who presumably may be citizens at a lower rate than non-Hispanics. Eventually, Georgia sued them and Justice backed down and approved the law. But most recently, you see that the Justice Department blocked the South Carolina voter identification law. In other words, you have to show photo ID when you go to vote to prove you're really who you say you are. Justice blocked that because of their ideological opposition to voter ID. And they're very likely to do the same thing to any state that submits a voter ID law to justice. Like Mississippi just passed one in a referendum. And what these states needed to do was go straight to federal court and ignore justice. The law gives them the choice. And so if you want to get state laws approved that prevent voter fraud, don't go to Eric Holder, go to federal court. Well, of course, I've written a whole book about this called Injustice. It's a Regnery book. And there's a lot of different areas where the Holder Justice Department is endangering the integrity of American elections. They're engaged in a massive campaign to force states to comply with Section 7 of NVRA, Motor Voter, drug treatment facilities, methadone treatment facilities, welfare offices, food stamp offices, forcing them to become aggressive voter registration offices, but they're not enforcing other parts of Motor Voter. The Holder Justice Department objected to South Carolina voter ID on the premise that there wasn't enough voter fraud to justify it. Well, the states don't have to justify election integrity measures under Supreme Court precedent. They don't have to show that there's a widespread problem, is the term that voter ID opponents like to use, widespread voter fraud. States don't have to do that. But the Holder Justice Department is leveraging its power to attack state election integrity measures while at the same time making sure as many of their voters are registered before November as possible. National Voter Registration Act was passed in 1993, and it contained a carefully crafted congressional compromise that ensured that any time you go to a DMV or a motor vehicles office or another registration office in a state, they would say, do you want to register to vote? Do you want to change your license, your voter registration address? And this was an effort to get everybody who might possibly want to vote on the voter rolls. But there was an important part of NVRA, and it's called Section 8. Section 8 is the part that says states have to clean up their voter rolls. They can't have dead people on the rolls. They can't have ineligible people. Well, the problem is the Holder Justice Department only enforces Section 7. And when I was there, they announced a policy that they were not going to enforce Section 8. They said so. I write about it in detail in my book. I name the names of the people who announced this policy. And what has happened now is states are infested with dead voters. In many places in the country, there are more eligible voters on the voter rolls registered to vote than there are human beings alive. There's counties all over the country like this. Johnston County, Iowa, counties in Florida, Indiana, Ohio, Texas, Michigan. I can go on, because Eric Holder will not enforce the law that he took an oath to uphold. Well, as I write about in the book, the people who are in charge of the Obama Justice Department are ideologically opposed to Section 8. They don't like it. They literally had a meeting in the conference room at the voting section in November of 2009, which I attended, and they said, they announced Julie Fernandez, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General in charge of the elections at Justice, announced that they were not going to enforce Section 8. And they were opposed to it because it didn't have, quote, anything to do with increasing turnout. It only reduced turnout. And so this perverse justification led to this announcement. And it's important for this reason. Christopher Coates was the voting section chief at the time, and he had proposed investigations into 8 states, 8, that had widespread voter roll problems, more voters on the rolls than people eligible to vote. So he proposed merely investigating these 8 states, not suing them, not attacking them in the media, but just investigating why this is happening. The Obama administration spiked those 8 investigations. They killed them off. And nothing has happened since then to get the voter rolls cleaned up in this nation ahead of the 2012 election. Well, they're almost all career. That's the problem, we did a study at PJ Media called Every Single One. It's nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, where we analyzed the biographies of the 113 hires inside the Civil Rights Division. Every single one of them was a left-winger. Every single one of them, that's the name of the series. 113. You can look at the political appointees inside the Civil Rights Division, there's probably 7 or 8, okay, that rotate from administration to administration, maybe 10 or 11, in that general area. So you have about a 10-to-1 ratio between career leftists and political leftists. The big difference is the career leftists get to stick around even in the next administration. Well, there's a couple areas where this shows up. The first is people can get driver's licenses who are not citizens in many states. And in some states, there's no differentiation between an illegal immigrant's driver's license and a U.S. citizen's driver's license. Can't tell the difference. So because of motor voter, when that illegal alien is getting a driver's license, because of motor voter, they are often, or they're almost always asked, do you want to register to vote? And so what has happened in many places around the country is that illegal alien will say yes. They don't know any better. They just figure this, if they're asking me, I must be allowed. And so the rolls in a lot of states have seen an influx of illegal aliens. Secretary of State of Colorado announced that there were illegals in the Colorado voter rolls. Utah did a study of actual illegal alien participation in the 2006 congressional elections. So there's data out there that show that illegal aliens are participating in American elections. On the day that President Obama was elected, members of the New Black Panther Party in Philadelphia, a man by the name of King Samir Shabazz and Jerry Jackson, stood in front of a polling place with a weapon in a Black Panther uniform shouting racial slurs at people. You're about to be ruled by the black man, cracker, things like that. According to sworn testimony, they tried to block the polls from people who had a legitimate right to enter those polls. The victims testified to this. It's a clear violation under Section 11B of the Voting Rights Act. You can't intimidate, threaten, or coerce people who are attempting to vote, aiding voters, anything of that sort. So the Bush administration filed a Section 11B Voting Rights Act case against the New Black Panthers, the National Party, and the National Party president. The Panthers never answered the case. They never replied. It was like getting a parking ticket and ignoring it. Everybody knows what happens. Well, in the new Obama administration, apparently, they didn't think that the Black Panthers should be subject to enforcement of federal law, and they ordered the attorneys on the case, myself included, to dismiss the case in May of 2009 for preposterous reasons that really defy all logic. The Civil Rights Commission, the Federal Civil Rights Commission, opened up an investigation into why this case was dismissed. As part of that investigation, they subpoenaed me and other attorneys on the case so we could give our testimony as to what really happened, spiking the case. Well, the Justice Department ordered us not to comply with the subpoena. To make matters worse, they sent someone up in our stead, the Assistant Attorney General, Tom Perez, who said things that were not accurate, and he, I believe, knew to be not accurate under oath. And so the day he testified, I resigned, and I complied with my subpoena. And that's the story of that. One of the problems with voter fraud is that people like to talk about rumor and innuendo, and they don't capture evidence that can be used in court. One of the things I tell my clients who are working in this area is you have got to get evidence, documentation of voter fraud. It does no good to say you heard a story that somebody touched a ballot box inappropriately. I like to use the story of fireflies. You sit on your back porch and you look out in the woods and you see fireflies. Aren't they pretty and amazing? But they don't mean anything unless you catch them in a jar. You got to go out and you got to grab the fireflies and catch them so you can look at them up close and show them around to the people, show them to judges, law enforcement officials. You have to go collect affidavits, evidence, photographs, documents, video, all of the evidence that could be used in court. It does no good to talk about stories. And that's why groups like King Street Patriots are so good at what they do. That's why groups like the California Election Integrity Project are so good at what they do, because they know you have to go catch the fireflies. You can't just talk about rumor and innuendo, because it won't stand up if you do. The new Black Panther Party, headed by a Howard Law graduate, Malik Zulu Shabazz, with foot soldiers like King Samir Shabazz in Philadelphia, who calls for the murder of babies, Najee Muhammad in Atlanta, who calls for the murder of police officers, or Quan LX in Houston, who was attacking legitimate law-abiding citizens who were monitoring the elections at the polls in 2010. He was criticizing their right to be there, going into polling places and getting the poll officials to throw out the almost all-white poll workers who were watching and recording the activities, which they had a right to do. So Quan LX is part of this new Black Panther radical attack, frankly, on the free and fair elections in this country. And so, you know, he's different in degree only from King Samir Shabazz wielding a baton and shouting racial slurs at voters in Philadelphia. The inventory of voter fraud, I touch on a lot of it in my book Injustice, but I'll give you one important example, and that's forced assistance. This is when wranglers are positioned in front of polling places and they grab voters, sometimes literally, and take them in, and they impose assistance on them. Now, a lot of people need to realize under federal law, you can have assistance in the polling place. It's Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act. I can pick anybody I want, except my boss or my union representative, to go into the booth with me and actually even vote the ballot. That's federally guaranteed. And people don't seem to understand that. They're going to get in a whole lot of trouble if they attack that right out there. But you cannot impose your will on voters. And I document in my book, I've litigated in court cases where hundreds of voters in a single polling place are forcibly assisted by these wranglers. Some of the wranglers are frequently criminals with long criminal records. I name one in my book, named Patsy Roby. Patsy Roby operates in Noxubee County, Mississippi, but she's no different than forced assisters in places like Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, Alabama, and Houston. It's the same behavior. And what this does, why this is important, it allows one or two party bosses, one or two ideologically driven community activists to put out a net of people to funnel and wring out every single possible vote from certain communities, with the outcome that elected officials end up being people who those assisters wanted and not who the voters wanted. One of the biggest cases is one that everybody should learn about. It's called United States versus Ike Brown. I just mentioned Patsy Roby. This case is a stunning example of how voter fraud works to steal not only the elections, but the government of an entire county in Mississippi. It's a stunning case. I mean, I write about it in the book Injustice, but you have forced assistance, you have voter intimidation, you have the threats of arrest of political opponents, you have the counting of illegal ballots, you have throwing out of legal ballots, you have the machine taking, literally the political bosses taking ballots to their house and marking them up. I mean, if you want to learn how voter fraud really operates, learn about the Ike Brown case, because it's just astonishing. And it's happening now in real time in this country. Well, there's good news and bad news on 2012. First, the bad news. The voter rolls are a mess. I mean, I've never seen anything like what we're seeing now with dead and ineligible voters on the voter rolls, and a Justice Department under Eric Holder completely unwilling to do anything about it for philosophical reasons. That's the bad news. The good news is there's now groups on the ground: King Street Patriots, Minnesota Majority, Election Integrity Project, Tea Parties all over the country are getting trained up in a way that this country has never seen. I mean, we've never seen an active citizenry who are learning about how voter fraud works, how to stop it, what to do on election day, how to analyze the voter rolls ahead of election day for problems. And so the voter fraudsters are terrified of these groups. You should see the news, how they are attempting to tarnish these law-abiding citizens, because they know that an active, vigilant citizenry is the best check against voter fraud. It's not the government. It's not the sheriff. It's not your local cop. Those guys don't know what voter fraud looks like unless it falls on this guy and hits them on the head. But an active, engaged citizenry is the answer. And anyone who wants to help out should look at groups like TrueTheVote.org. They're what's going to stop the stealing of the 2012 election.